In this video, we will show you how to install your alternator. Let's get started. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do when you're replacing an alternator is to make your way over to the negative battery terminal. Use a 10mm to loosen this nut, just enough that you can wiggle this wiring around and remove it from the battery. Now that we've disconnected the negative battery terminal, let's make our way over towards the passenger side of the engine. You'll find that you have this metal shield right across here. We're going to go ahead and dislodge this. We'll move it out of the way, and then we should be able to gain access to the top area of the alternator. To remove this, I'll use a metal trim tool. Carefully get in between this area and gently separate the push clip. Now you can make your way over to the other side and separate that as well. With that out of the way, you have a nice clear view of the top of the alternator. We're looking for the wiring harness that leads to the back side of the alternator right here. On this, you'll find that you have a little squeeze tab. Squeeze it with your fingers and gently lift the wiring up and off of there. Once you do, give it a quick check for corrosion. There we are. Once you have it disconnected, give it a quick check for corrosion and set that aside. Once you've removed that, move along to this area. You'll find that you have a plastic cover that you can easily remove using a pry bar. We'll just dislodge this by forcing it towards the rear. With that out of the way, we're going to continue on to this rubber boot. We'll use our pry bar and gently pull the boot off of the area, making sure that we do not damage the boot because you do need to reuse it. Underneath that plastic boot, you're going to find a mounting nut. Let's remove the nut and the wire. We'll use our 13mm socket to remove the mounting nut. There's the mounting nut. Now I'll just reach down and remove the wire from the back of the alternator. Now we'll use an inverted Torx socket. It's shaped like a star and it's a size E8. This down on the tip of the stud. Turn this counterclockwise to fully remove it. Let's try to push on this AC line a little bit. Give ourselves some room to remove our mounting stud. To remove the alternator, you're going to have to remove the right front axle. With that said, safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now let's make our way under here and remove this plastic cover. For this, you're going to find that you have 2 8mm headed mounting bolts. There's one directly above your right front axle. There's a second one, a little bit more further forward. Remove your shield. With that out of the way, you have a nice clear view of your serpentine belt tensioner. That's this area right here. The tensioner itself is spring loaded, so we're going to come right down to this bottom area with a 15mm wrench. Turn this clockwise. You'll find that it releases the tension from the belt and you can slide it off of one of your pulleys. Slide it right off of the crank pulley. Remove your tool. Before you fully remove your serpentine belt, take a quick note of the belt routing. Now we can remove the belt. Set that aside. Let's continue on by removing our 32mm axle nut. Once you have the axle nut out of the way, continue on with a hammer and punch. We'll come right in the center and break the axle free from the wheel bearing. Install one of your lug nuts to hold the rotor in place. Let's continue on by making our way along the backside of the knuckle. You're looking for the caliper. You'll find that you have two 15mm headed bolts that hold the caliper bracket to the knuckle itself. Let's remove each of those mounting bolts, inspect the pads, and then set the caliper aside. Hang that caliper so it's putting no pressure on your flex hose. Move along to removing your ABS wire from its mounting bracket. Once you've done that, continue on to your 15mm pinch bolt that holds the steering knuckle to your front strut. The next thing we'll do is use a hammer. We're going to tap along the top of the knuckle right here. We're going to try to separate the knuckle from the front strut. Now let's reach in from behind here. We'll grab the axle and carefully pull it out of the backside of our bearing. Now let's follow the axle inboard a little bit. Right behind the oil pan, you're going to find two 13mm headed mounting nuts that hold this bracket in place. That bracket holds the center carrier bearing in place. Remove and inspect your bracket. With that out of the way, we can continue on by removing the axle from this area. Now, when you do this, pay attention to where the axle goes into your transmission. There's going to be a seal here, and commonly there will be fluid that will come out. Make sure you have a collection bucket under here, and make sure you're safe. We'll come in between the axle and the carrier bearing mount and gently pry this out. Remove your axle. There it is, friends. With the axle out of the way, let's continue on by removing our carrier bearing bracket from the engine. For this, you'll find three 13mm headed bolts. One towards the passenger side, one up top, and one down below towards the driver's side. Remove all three. Now that I have that bolt out and inspected, I'm just going to put it back in a couple threads. Once I've done that, I'll continue on by fully removing my other two. Remove your bracket, give it a quick inspection, and set that aside. Now we can remove our final bolt. While we remove this, keep in mind this is the last thing holding the alternator in place. For this bolt, we'll use a 13mm socket. There's our mounting bolt. Remove your alternator. There it is, friends. Once you have the alternator out of the vehicle, continue on by removing the plastic cover from the back. You'll notice that you have 3 Phillips head mounting screws holding this in place. Remove all 3. Okay friends, let's get started on installing our alternator. Let's put it face down like this. Paying attention to each of our connectors, you want to make sure that you take the cover and line it up properly. You'll notice that you have 2 carve-outs in the cover itself that should align with this area. Slide it into place and line up your 3 mounting bolt holes. Start in all 3 of your mounting bolts and snug them up. Let's get this in the vehicle. There we are. Now for the bolt, we'll make sure we also put our bracket in place first. Now when we put in this mounting bolt, you want to make sure you just start it in, but leave it loose. We still have to make our way to the top and start in that bolt as well. Now before we tighten the mounting bolt and that nut underneath, make your way back up top. You need to also start in the upper stud up there. While you do this, pay attention. There should be a bracket that goes in place over the alternator. Slide it over there and then put in your mounting stud. We'll snug that up and torque it to 18 foot-pounds. Once you have the stud tightened, continue on by snugging the nut and then torque it to 35 foot-pounds. To gain access to torque this, if you needed to, you could carefully lift up on the power steering reservoir, torque the mounting nut, and then reinstall the reservoir. Looking at the body, you're going to find that you have 3 little hooks that look like this, and looking at the reservoir, you'll find that you have rubber grommets that should slide into place. Line them up and slide it down. Now let's make our way back underneath the vehicle. We're going to continue on by snugging up our mounting bolt here towards the passenger side. Now that we have that one snug, let's also snug our mounting nut over here. Now that we have both of those snug, continue on by torquing them to 35 foot-pounds. Now we can put in our axle carrier bearing bracket. Start in all 3 of your mounting bolts, snug them up, and then torque them to 22 foot-pounds. The next thing that you want to do is make your way up to the axle seal. Give it a quick inspection. Make sure it's soft and pliable and it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Assuming it seems okay, we'll just go ahead and wipe it down and get ready to install our axle. All right, let's get our axle installed. We're gonna bring it up through the passenger side wheel well and slide it into the transmission, being extremely careful for our seal. As we slide this in, you also want to pay attention to the carrier bearing and make sure it slides into the bracket properly. Once you're sure the axle is pressed completely into the transmission, we'll continue on with our bracket piece. Slide it in position, start on both of your 13mm mounting nuts, snug them up, and then torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now it's time to prepare the end of the axle so we can slide it into our wheel bearing. Use some copper never sees on the splines. Slide this into place. We'll press this up and in, and also line up the top of the steering knuckle with your lower part of the strut. Looking at the strut, you can see the line where the knuckle was originally. Let's slide it up into place. Once you have it in place, continue on with your pinch bolt. Now we can bottom this out and then torque it to 74 foot-pounds. Reinstall your brake caliper. Start in each of your mounting bolts and then tighten them to 98 foot-pounds. Resecure your ABS wire. Let's continue on to cleaning the area where our axle seal is and make sure that we remove any of our existing transmission fluid. Now it's time to install our serpentine belt. If you need it, there's a picture of the belt routing on the hood. Let's take it and put it all the way up on top above that power steering pulley. You want to make sure it fits into all the grooves on that. Once you have the serpentine belt up and over the power steering pump, bring the forward side down underneath your AC compressor. Hold it in that position. Now we're going to continue on with the rearward side of the belt. For that, you want to come all the way over towards the rear of the engine. Bring it underneath your idler pulley and then up above your alternator. Now we can take it down underneath that tensioner and we're gonna bring it all the way over to the water pump. Bring it right up and over that. Now once you have it over the water pump, you're gonna go ahead and pull off any slack. Double check to make sure you're over all the pulleys properly. You'll notice some of your pulleys are grooved. You need to make sure you're sitting inside the grooves. Assuming it looks good, let's continue on by sliding this over towards the crank pulley down along the bottom here. Now this is where you're going to have to hold it in place and then continue by releasing tension from the belt on the tensioner. We'll turn that tensioner clockwise to release the tension here. It can be a little bit tight trying to put the belt on over the crank as the last pulley because it has a little bit of a lip right here. If you struggle too much in this area, carefully reach your hands up inside and try to slide it over the water pump as the last pulley. Let's continue on to putting on our splash shield. When we do this, we'll make sure that we use our 8mm headed bolts. Slide each of them in place and snug them up. Now we can remove that lug nut. After you've done that, you can continue on by putting on your axle nut. When you do this, you want to make sure that you tighten it up by hand as much as possible. Never use an air gun because you could potentially damage your bearing. We'll torque that in a minute. Continue on by putting the wheel on. After you have the wheel on there, start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and bottom those out as well. Now we can get the wheel safely back on the ground. We'll torque the axle nut and then all 5 of our lug nuts. With the wheel safely on the ground, torque the axle nut to 207 foot-pounds. Once you've torqued that, continue on to each of your lug nuts. We'll torque these to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Let's make our way back up top along the backside of the engine and we'll secure our positive cable to the backside of the alternator. Once you have that slid into place, continue on with the mounting nut. Once you have it started, snug it up. Once you have it snug, torque it to 106 inch-pounds. Make sure you cover the area with its protective boot. Let's reconnect in our other electrical connector. Listen for a click. Give it a tug to make sure it's completely secure. Now let's reinstall this. The angle that it should look when it is installed should be directly like this. Now we can put on our metallic protective shield. Slide it into place and install both of your push clips. It's time to reconnect the negative battery terminal. Slide it into place, press it down onto the battery as far as it can go, and then tighten your 10mm mounting nut. Give it a wiggle to make sure it's completely secured to the battery. The first thing you need to do is go ahead and start up the vehicle. Let it run for approximately 5 seconds and turn it right back off. Double check the belt. Make sure it has the proper routing and it's sitting inside all the grooves properly. If it isn't, make sure you make that adjustment. Once you've done that, continue on over to your transmission dipstick. You're going to need to add some transmission fluid. Looking at the top of the dipstick, you can tell exactly what type of fluid to use. Mercon LV. To check the fluid level, you want to make sure you're on a flat, level surface. First, we'll go ahead and pull it out and we'll give it a quick wipe. Once you have it fully removed, pay attention down at the far end. You'll find that you have 2 little dots, and in between, there's a hatched area. When the fluid is full and warm at normal running temperature, it should be someplace in between the hatched area. If it's too low, you're going to need to add some. If it's too high, you'll have to remove some. To add fluid, you can come right in through the dipstick tube with a funnel using Mercon LV transmission fluid.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.